Hi, you are at How to Help Parents Plan for Post-Secondary Inclusion. We are very glad that you chose to spend this hour with us. I am Alyssa DiFilippo from Parents Helping Parents. We're a parent training information center in San Jose, California. I manage a program called Connections California, which is a statewide online resource and information hub for families and their loved ones with disabilities who are approaching and going through transition to adulthood and also securing adult services. With me today is my esteemed colleague, Debbie Drennan.
Hi, I'm Debbie Drennan. I am an assistive technology specialist and an early inclusion facilitator. I'm located currently in South Orange County of California, having previously worked up at Parents Helping Parents. And I'm actually primarily coming to you today as a parent as well as a professional because both Alyssa and I have young adults who have successfully transitioned into adulthood. And it is through those experiences that we've come up with our top 10 tips. But before we get started, I was wondering if our hosts on here had anything they wanted to add in or say to everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name's Sarah James. I'm a program support specialist with the Supporting Inclusive Practices. I'm thrilled to be the moderator for this breakout session. Just a few logistics, first of all. The session will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda, so you can access that on the conference page after for about 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The interpretation icon on the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We're just waiting for our translator to get connected, but that should be any moment now. And we will ensure the ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and presenter. Please ensure your volume is muted to avoid background distractions while presenters are speaking. And we encourage you to engage with others in the chat. And when possible, keep your cameras on so we can see your face. And with that, Alyssa and Debbie, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. We've kind of jumped the gun a little bit, so we do apologize. If you do have any issues getting into Spanish translation or seeing the ASL or getting closed caption, just pop that in the chat and we'll make sure you get taken care of. So go for it. Alyssa, you up.
Okay. So we want to talk a little bit about family engagement today. We know that you probably are aware of what it is, and this evidence-based research that has told us for decades that family engagement increases student achievement, improves behavior, helps develop social emotional skills. It sounds very similar to inclusive education outcomes, right? Like higher academic achievement for all students and increased self-esteem and successful social interactions. We also would like to touch on how teachers can understand the parents' perspective of transition planning and how parents may approach their youth's transition to adulthood. And we do have our top 10 list of parents' perspective on transition planning in the hopes that with educators understanding the perspective of parents, we can then help parents to grapple with this somewhat overwhelming time in families' lives. We also want to encourage parents to scaffold and support the contributions of parents to building a robust ITP. So what is family engagement? It is a big job, even bigger for families of students with disabilities facing transition to adulthood. And we like to think of this parent engagement, parent involvement, family-school partnership as requiring thoughtful planning and effort to develop and maintain. As educators, you need to get to know the families, their family composition, their challenges, but we also need to collaborate. And collaboration involves educators actively encouraging families to participate in meaningful ways with decision-making, asking them to identify those potential supports for their youth, whether they be family, friends, counselors, church groups, brainstorming together and not coming up with ideas in a silo and just presenting them at a meeting. There could even be a parent questionnaire as part of the transition assessment to include the parent in planning. And we want to encourage parent participation right from the beginning of the transition planning, maybe even calling them and checking in to form that strong relationship, because we really want to have communication be more than one way, meaning from the teacher to the parent. We want the parent to be having input on the youth's strengths and their interests, hopes, and their dreams. And what are the family's expectations and desires? What's worked and what hasn't worked in the past, and why? Making sure that the transition plan reflects the preferences of the student and the family, and that everybody on the team needs to respect and listen to each other, even if you don't agree. And trying to, if not eliminate, at least explain all that professional jargon, all the acronyms that roll off our tongues so easily, be able to explain them and define them. And also introduce and talk about all the other agencies that are involved in transition to adulthood, make introductions and invite, suggest invitations to transition IEP meetings. So this cooperation, when educators are committed to families and families are committed to prioritizing their youth's education, this is reciprocal cooperation. So we want to try and schedule meetings at mutually available times and provide translation planning information in the chosen language. I know it's not always easy. I know it's sometimes expensive, but if anything that we can do to contribute to that, we should. Which brings us to the cultural awareness piece. And there's the basic understanding of cultural norms and values, but we also, cultural awareness in general, meeting the families and parents where they are, offering the respect and choice of whatever level of participation the families want, and understanding what the home and community life is of the learner, because that just helps shape your whole vision of the whole learner. So what does inclusion look like, Debbie?
What does inclusion look like for young adults? It is the expectation. There is, when all of our young adults enter the big bad world after schooling, they will be included in the world, right? But we understand this can be a big challenge depending on the young adult and their abilities and their disabilities. But it is everywhere. They will be included. It is common in all young adult experiences, whether it be employment, whether it be internships or the paid internship programs, whether it's through volunteer opportunities, going to college or a trade school. Day programs even have inclusion. They go out into the community. And of course, social and recreational opportunities that abound or should abound in our communities. Inclusion is common in all young adult experiences. So we need to make sure we are thinking about that for all the young adults so that they can know that they belong in our world, right? This sense of otherness needs to go away. They are a part of our world and they will be included in our world. And we need to make sure that that happens for them to their abilities.
So the top 10 list of what educators need to understand about parents' perspective on transition to adulthood.
Drum roll,
Number
please.
10, yes. You know, families sometimes are just plain scared about everything to do with their learners, their kids' disability, especially when they consider life after school. You know, not knowing post-secondary options, recognizing their youth's future is staring everyone in the face, but just not knowing what they can do. Wondering if any behavior issues would interfere with future learning and employment, scared their young adult's going to be isolated, lonely, lack those social interactions, not be included the way they were in the school environment. Are they going to be successful? Are they going to be happy? And the big one, you know, what will happen when I'm gone? So these emotions of denial, anxiety, fear, depression, guilt, anger, they are not fixed emotions. They're going to rear their heads at any time during this process. So, you know, parenting a child, a youth, a young adult, even an adult with a disability is an emotional roller coaster ride. It's scary, exhilarating, unexpected, bumpy, never boring.
Never.
So what can educators do to help? Well, know that roller coaster ride of emotions is not directed at you. You know, Jonathan Mooney was talking about his mom who would drop, you know, expletives all the time during IEP meetings just because that was her. But, you know, realize that, you know, those emotions, they're not directed personally at you. It may just be part of the way the parent is processing. So try and find out as much as you can about the family and the family's culture, and display empathy for the families, that understanding and compassion for a family situation. You know, we teach parents how to have compassion and empathy for a teacher's situation. They have big caseloads, they have a lot's coming at them, they have a hard job. You know, compassion should actually be the 5th C. I should add that to the slide on family engagement. But you know, educating yourself about where the family, where the parents are in transition planning, and initiate whenever you can that person-driven thinking or planning for the youth. And if you're not using it now, or if you're a newbie, or even if you do it with your kiddos all the time in meetings, a really good video that Dr. Richard Rosenberg just did, I think it was in the fall, from Chapman University's Thompson Policy Institute on Disability. It's a person-driven planning session. So you can actually watch an expert at work, and we have that link in the resources. So again, a newbie, or if you're already doing it, take a look at that, because it will inform your practice. And of course, refer to your Parent Training Information Center, your PTI, or your Family Empowerment Center, FEC. We have maps and links also in the resources at the end of the presentation, so you can check out who actually is in your local area.
Which brings us to number 9. Parents feel unprepared, overwhelmed with their lives. So when they come to an IEP or a 504 meeting, they may forget to say what they plan to say, or forget what you said to them. Because why? They are stressed. And then when you think about stress, I don't know if any of you have seen this hand model of the brain, but it really kind of clarifies and puts in a nice little visual way what happens to you when you feel that stress. So I'm going to go ahead and play. It's just a 1-minute quick video. There is no words. Oh, there's words, and it's just music underneath. So hopefully the closed captioning will work on the video, and it's not. So I apologize, there were no words to that. It was just words in writing on the screen. So you didn't miss anything orally, sorry. But basically what this represents to me is, you know, you go into what is, oops, sorry, apologies. You go into these meetings and you're already stressed, because this is a meeting about your child's future and how they're doing, and preparing them for the big bad world out there. And it's stressful. So that's why parents may not be hearing everything you're saying to them, or may forget what they want to say to you. So how can you help as an educator? First, reduce the stressors of the meeting however you can, wherever you can. And ensure that young adult is present at the meeting and participates however they can. And the reason for that is it keeps the focus on why you're coming together, is to support that young adult as they continue to grow and thrive, and prepare them for world outside of schooling, right? And it really keeps the focus and the emotions around that young adult. And it really helps the parent understand that you're coming as a team, that you're all there for the same reason. You want to support their child, right? And if you need to, plan on several shorter meetings if needed. And I know that can be difficult with scheduling. I get it. But I think it's really important. If you need to, if you can, that would be great. And of course, provide visual representation of what is being discussed. I love shared memories. And a shared memory is where, if you have a whiteboard, if you have a way of making notes as you're talking about the goals for the individual and what how they're doing and how you're going to help them meet them, write it in a way that everyone can see it at the meeting. And that gives the parent the opportunity to then take a picture of that shared, so they can remember all the things that were being said. Shared memories are terrific because it really brings a team together in a collaborative way. And the young adults, of course, can also take a picture. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're doing, and ask for clarification on different points later if needed. And of course, encourage the family to bring their ideas and thoughts in writing, or even verbally, an audio or a video, so that they can remember and then explain what they were doing. And of course, check in with those families and with the student, both before the meetings and after the meetings, to make sure their questions were indeed answered, and they understand what happened at that meeting.
And so number 8 talks about the alphabet soup that I mentioned before. And this is often something that parents, this is the whole acronym system is something that parents, it's like learning a new language, right? And one of the very reasons PHP created Connections California, we have all these new agencies, and depending on an individual circumstance, it can involve investigation of SSI, in-home supportive services, IHSS, legal aspects like durable power of attorney, supportive decision-making, conservatorships, there's Department of Rehab connections, there are regional center services, there's housing and independent options. And what about that pediatric to adult healthcare? Wow. I mean, I just did a presentation for Family Voices of California on that from a parent's perspective. That is a huge one. It's just huge. And then what about post-secondary education or training options? There are so many challenges and so much paperwork and so much facing parents. It's enough to turn your hair gray if you have any left. Right?
Exactly.
So how can educators help? Well, maybe know who to ask for information and what is available in your community, and encourage parents and families to invite outside agencies to the transition meetings early and often. And, again, explain that alphabet soup. Don't just let the acronyms roll off your tongue, and get input from the young adult and the parent. Do they understand the shift in the services and the agencies? And of course, again, we'll be saying this throughout the presentation. Refer to your PTI, your FEC. Connections California is a statewide online resource. It has information and a robust e-learning library. The information is general enough for statewide, but if you really want to talk to a person about transition needs, refer to the PTI or the FEC. Now, number 7 talks about parents' lack of knowledge of transition planning in general. I mean, we know what an ITP is. We know that a robust ITP could and should drive the IEP. We know that it's better to include that ITP sooner than later, but parents, they might not know anything about this. So how do you partner with a parent to build a robust ITP? Well, first, they don't know what they don't know. So you need to explain to them what's coming. Maybe even start that in middle school if you can, 12, 13, at the very end.
Or earlier.
There are districts throughout California who are, have college and career readiness skills as part of their elementary, maybe even preschool curriculums, and
Yes.
IEP. There are self-advocacy goals in IEP in elementary school. But let's not be too aggressive for those folks who are only doing it up to the 16th birthday, and let's just try and do it by 12. We talked about defining the alphabet soup, and what about requirements for graduation? Including accommodations and modifications and what might be needed for a diploma. What about a certificate versus diploma versus, and I understand I missed a really good session on the alternative pathways. Yeah. I will go back and watch it.
The whole goal there is no certificates. Everyone should go for the diploma.
Okay.
Period.
Right.
I love that. It was a great one. Go back and see it if you haven't seen it.
I will do. And so what's your district doing about that? It's rolled out now. So what is your district doing? And what about that scary phrase, age of majority? That, it's legalese, it's kind of antiquated. Well, explain to them, talk about that's what means who makes decisions when, and also give options for parents' continued involvement within the IEP team. And does the student and the family really understand how the laws change from the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, to the American with Disabilities Act, the Section 504, after they leave the school system? Do they really understand that communication is then very different from communication with parents in high schools? And, it's helpful if the IEP teams focus on abilities. Jonathan Mooney talked a lot about this in his keynote. Focus on the strengths and on the desires and the abilities, and start those transition assessments early and do them often. And, we talked about maybe having a parent questionnaire in that as well, because the parents do have information that will form and help form those post-secondary goals of education and training, employment, and independent living skills. And we want to make sure we suggest to parents that how they might help with those community activities and experiences outside of school. So this is a sample of a part of an ITP form. I think it's from the Sonoma SELPA. But it would be nice if all the forms were standardized. I know we're working toward that, right? But that one phrase, upon completion of school, I will, that really needs to be authentic. Wonderful if it's in the student's own words, or at the very least approved by the student afterwards. But the important thing here is that from the parent's perspective, right? The parent's input is that community experiences and activities. And so that kind of forms a triangle, right? You have the post-secondary goal, then you have the activities, experiences, related services, and you have that annual IEP goal. And, parents don't understand this unless you tell them about it, right? But the parent is often a very good source of information as to what the learner is thinking, feeling, wanting, and doing. And that family engagement, that comes from the creation of and planning for the supporting activity, the community experience, and scaffolding those activities outside of school. So those activities need to reflect the student interest, they need to be attainable, and they need to be observable, right, by the person who's responsible for the goal. So if the parent is willing, why not have the parent also be responsible along with the student and the teacher? It gives the parent some sense of contribution and meaningful contribution to helping the successful outcome of their youth when they leave school. So it's important to remember these goals and the activities and community experiences are going to change from year to year, potentially, especially if you start early, and that this triangle makes sense. That the post-secondary goal works with the community experience, works with the annual IEP goal. And, having gone through this process myself, I can tell you that I felt like I was a contributing member to building her robust ITP. This is an example. This is my daughter's actual writing from her ITP when she was a junior in high school. I've shared this with countless parents and teachers because it can really be applied to any interest for any student with the proper scaffolding and support. So in her case, she, wanted to have a doggy daycare or run a dog walking business. So the teacher helped to create 20 questions, interview questions. I found the dog walker. I found the doggy daycare business. I took her there. I scaffolded the interview. We recorded. She made sure she got all that information. She brought it back to the classroom and then wrote 2 5-paragraph essays. Now, you're not talking about somebody who's a writer and a great reader. I mean, we're talking, comprehension 7th, 8th grade level. She wrote these because she had a buy-in. And that's why it's so important to do those transition assessments early and understand what it is the youth wants, what their strengths are, and their desires. So, okay, so I was a contributing member to a robust ITP. What if a parent can't be? What if a parent lacks the time or the motivation? Well, maybe another family and friend, maybe a sibling. What about the student services DOR coach? Do you have Workability 1 in your district? What about a transition partnership program in your district? I don't have to tell you that going the extra mile can really help achieve those successful outcomes, because, those activities, the things that happen as an adjunct to what's learned in school are sometimes as important or maybe even more important than what happens when the learner is in school.
Yes.
So the best predictor of getting a job later is getting a job sooner.
Yep.
And what more inclusive environment than the competitive integrative employment. So we want to promote the parents thinking early about part-time jobs, internships, volunteer work, shadowing someone at work. If those community activities and experiences that parents can scaffold for their youth, that teach responsibility, independence, good decision-making, and lots of other soft skills that people need to be successful in an inclusive work world. Everyone has a first job, right? It promotes inclusion, it builds self-advocacy and self-reliance skills. So we want to encourage parents to do this. And this isn't something that, we're just spouting because it's what we believe in. Surveys have been done. This is one that was done by Raise and MTAC kind of recently. They partnered with over 600 self-identified young adults with disabilities and 150 parents asking, what was the relationship between several forms of transition preparation? And, not rocket science, the experiences, I think it's like 89%, were what they were pointing to as the best indicators. So we want to promote that independence. But we don't want to forget about the education and training opportunities that, one of those other post-secondary overarching goals. And there's just so much teachers can do here, right? So parents need to remember to identify and explore those post-secondary options. 2-year schools, 4-year schools, trade programs. What about all those inclusive programs that are cropping up all over the country for our students with IDD? The list keeps growing. We want to make sure that we look at that Think College site and refer that Think College site to parents and the youth themselves to investigate. There's even financial aid that's available. Send information emails to parents starting in middle school to initiate this thinking, just like they may be thinking about for their typical kiddos. Attend CAC meetings and talk about this. Invite learners who have been to inclusive programs back to talk to your classes. There are many, many things you can do to encourage the parent to develop their students' self-determination, because that's really what it is all about. And all of this helps prepare the learner for the inclusive post-secondary environments. Now, of course, independent living is also thrown in there, and it has as applicable next to it, as applicable, but it encompasses community participation, finances, hygiene, housework, transportation, day-to-day mundane responsibilities, and of course the all-important healthcare, and being able to go to a doctor on your own and say what your medications are and show where it hurts. Even that you want to, in as much as the youth can, as they become an adult, be able to communicate with a doctor. That's essential. Where are they going to live? Navigating transportation, all of these things. I have to say, if I see one more ITP with an independent living goal being they will balance a checkbook, I don't know. I don't really, I think I'm just going to blow my stack, because what is a checkbook? Okay.
Right. And who has checkbooks anymore anyway? Nobody.
Enough said on that.
All right. Sorry.
So this preparing for post-secondary life, 20 powerful strategies. It is on the Think College website. It was prepared by, I think, a Dr. Wade. But, it talks about things like, sending your youth to overnight camp, taking public transport, even when you don't have to, helping them to know what to do with their downtime. So, again, being able to communicate with the parent and say, what is it you think your youth needs to work on with independent living? And how can we incorporate that into their post-secondary overarching goal of independent living as applicable? So to sum up, how can educators help here? Share the power of self-advocacy. And we're going to talk about self-advocacy a little bit later. That's closer to the number, I think 2 or 3 on the list, because it is so essential and so important. It's the key to effective communication, acceptance, and eventual inclusion, right? And what about student-led IEPs? Or even just having the learner attend their IEP meeting. I'm probably preaching to the choir here when I talk about how important they are, but you know what? Parents are often resistant to that. And I was one of them. I know that. And now looking back, I wish I'd had my daughter come to her IEP meetings from when she was very young, even to say, I like pink, or I like to sing, or I think I'm good at math, whatever it might be. Even if the parent is resistant to naming the disability, it's important that the needs of the youth, of the child, are still apparent so that they can be addressed, right? So my daughter started going to her IEPs. Maybe she was about 16. She'd come to about half of them, and she'd write out her transition goals. And she was very involved in the planning. And also, she also was having some interpersonal problems within school. And I had been asking for counseling for about 3 or 4 months. She came to that meeting. She explained why she thought she needed counseling. Within 2 weeks, she was set up with weekly counseling sessions. So never underestimate the power of their voice at their meeting. And what better place to practice speaking up for themselves than at a space like an IEP meeting. And never underestimate their desire to be included in that meeting or even in the planning of that meeting. And I have a story. Debbie has heard this before. She could probably tell it herself. And if I lose power like I did one other time,
I'll tell it. I'll tell it.
Tell it herself. Okay, so I got the email to schedule my daughter's IEP meeting. And so it was like going to be a Thursday, 3 weeks from now at 1 o'clock. And I told my daughter, oh, so your IEP is going to be on such and such. And she looked at me and she said, it's my IEP. Didn't anybody think to consult me about my schedule? It's not right and it's disrespectful. Why do they tell me I'm a grown-up and my opinion matters and I should make my own decisions when no one even thinks to consult me about scheduling my IEP? I feel betrayed. What were they thinking? She was 19 years old. By the time she graduated her transition program, it was during COVID, it was June of 2020. But when things started opening up again, she ended up being employed by the very same place where she had her internship that the IEP was scheduled at the exact same time. And she said, I can't make that. I have a responsibility to my employer and I am going to be at work that day. So we need to reschedule my IEP meeting. So she went on to be employed by that place for 2.5 years. So again, never underestimate the youth's voice. Educate parents to promote those activities outside of school and to scaffold them. Educate learners and parents about the post-secondary options for college and career. Help the parents glimpse into the future and understand that shift in mindset from driver to passenger, from manager to consultant, because we really want to promote that youth's independence as appropriate and as much as possible. Again, refer to the PTIs and the FECs for support and resources. And Debbie, do you have anything to add about IEPs before we now then we'll go into talking about
just the importance of encouraging the youth at a very, very young age that their voice is important and they should be at the IEPs. My oldest son has CP, and when he was in the 3rd grade, he had been attending his IEPs, at his level, what he could, and just for bits of it. But in 3rd grade, he had something he had to say at his IEP. So we all go for it. What do you need to tell us? And he said that, and we didn't even think about this, when he was the only child in a wheelchair who used a wheelchair at his elementary school as well as his middle school. And he would go out on the playground with all the kids, and he was terrified because of all the balls bouncing around. And had the CP, he couldn't protect himself. He was afraid he was going to get hit in the face with a ball, and he had no way of protecting himself. He wanted a safe space put on the playground where no balls allowed, and he could be there and feel comfortable with it. The next day, they had marked out a safe space for him on the playground, and he felt much better. And that told him 2 things. 1, his voice matters. And 2, he needs to speak up, because no one knew that was a concern for him until he had the courage to speak up. And he took that with him through middle school, through high school, college, and now he's an independent adult living on his own with appropriate supports and working full time. He learned his voice matters. And I think the IEP is the perfect place to start that. But let's now go into the next part, which is assistive technology as a related service. Parents lack the knowledge of how related services should be addressed pre-ITP, during ITP, post-ITP. They don't know, again, what they don't know, right? And what are related services? They're essential, right? In the purposes section of IDEA 2004, they described what they wanted the law to accomplish. And they added further education as a purpose of the law, right? It is to ensure that all children with disabilities have FAPE, free public appropriate education, that emphasizes special education and related services to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So it's special education and related services. And what are related services? Well, we all know speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, but do we know recreation services is a related service? Rehabilitation counseling, those are those assessments. You know, what do you want to do when you grow up? Assessments. They can start early and move on. When my youngest son, he had a 504. He never had rehab counseling, but he always had to look past high school to be successful because he had ADHD and sensory issues. And it was really hard for him in high school with all the information coming at him from all the different classes. And he had to look past high school, knowing that once he got out of high school, he would be going into a college system where he could focus on what he wanted to focus on, right? For a career. He just had to get through high school. And what really helped him was some of these rehab counseling that was provided for him, as well as going on college tours so he could see what it's going to be like once he got out of high school. And that really is helpful. Orientation and mobility. Think about it and young adults, how important that is, that they be able to get around their communities on their own without mom and dad driving them. Especially some of the communities that are really spread apart here in California. How are they going to get from maybe their ranch to a setting that is, 40 miles away to work? How are they going to do that? What services are available? They should know about this. Assistive technology, and I'm going to delve into that in a bit, as well as social work services to help the family and the youth understand all the services that are available to them as adults. That is part of a related service they could tap into in the ITP. So what is assistive technology? There is actually a federal law called the 21st Century Assistive Technology Act. This follows the youth as an adult. This is not just educational, this is adult. Defines AT in the following way. It's any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. And I want to say again, it's for adults as well as youth. You've seen this in the IEPs. Did you know this follows them through the AT Act? And actually, the importance of assistive technology as part of a transition plan was re-emphasized through the Department of Education in their myths and facts surrounding AT that came out in January of this year. And basically, the myth has been, well, AT doesn't really need to be considered as part of the ITP, when the fact is AT should be considered for inclusion in a child's transition plan, as AT devices and services create more opportunities for that child to be successful in their post-secondary plans. And there's some studies you can dig into if you'd like to find out more about why they're saying that, because it is true. It has been shown to be true. So that's great. I, as a teacher, have no idea what AT is out there in the employment world. Well, a place you can start to look for that is, once you have an idea of that individual's goals for themselves, you can go to this Technology and Employment Toolkit. The link for it is in the resource section of the slides at the very back, and take a look at what are some options for this particular competitive employment program for this child or this individual going into this employment. What are some AT tools that might help them be successful, and how can we train them to use it now before they get there? Because again, my oldest son, when he went to college, he had been fully trained on all of the assistive technology tools he needed to be successful as an independent college student. There was another young woman I know who, when she had dyslexia, she went to college. She had not been fully trained in her assistive technology tools. So she had to take an extra year to learn how to really use those tools so she could be independent. How was she being successful in high school? Her mother was reading the textbooks to her. And no one knew that. So there's another thing to ask your families is, how much support are you giving them to be successful in high school? Right? Because I'm not going to show the video, but the biggest thing that comes out of this video is, this is a young adult who happens to be my son. And he says, do you rely on your parents or your friends to keep you on track? You're going to take them to college with you? No, you're not. So we have to think about what are the parents doing to support their youth to be successful in high school, and what supports can we put in place or can we look at so they can be successful beyond high school. And so this was him showing how to use, learned how to use Google calendars and reminders. So we're not going to show it in the interest of time, but it's a great video that you can share with others. So how can you as an educator help? First of all, thoughtfully consider AT devices and services, not just for success in this high school setting, but success for the future, and make sure they know what they need and what the names are for those items. They can't just ask an employer, hey, I need, you know, I don't understand, I can't read well. They have to say, well, I need this to have text to speech. And that gives them what the employer needs to be, help that individual be successful. Educate the parents as to and the family and the youth as to the importance of AT in promoting inclusion in all aspects of the learner's life, including that dreaded checkbook. Plan for the future. Consider all those related services and needs in planning for that future education, employment, independent living, and help the learner understand the need for those services and tools and be able to name them. Are you still with
5? I am definitely still with you. So number 5, you know, we've been talking about accentuating the positive and talking about abilities, but sometimes what parents see are their child's disabilities. They don't focus on the abilities. And that makes it all the more difficult to let go, to let grow as that inevitable shift from manager to consultant comes about. But, you know, it's not surprising, though, because as parents, our lives consist of filling our loved ones' needs with more than playing to their strengths. You know, we're going to medical appointments. We're taking them to be assessed. They're assessed every year. They have tests. They have services. They have therapies for this or that. Where I can remember, like, buying toys and then thinking, how is this going to help her pincher grasp? If I get down on the floor, is this going to help her midline? Is she going to be able to crawl? I mean, you're thinking all the time about improving them, right? Improving what is already perfect, okay? But so no wonder it's hard when you want to start thinking about this ability mindset and shifting to it. And it becomes even more difficult to shift from the manager to consultant when you don't have an ability mindset, because what if the youth is relying too much on adult help and support? Just what Debbie's example with the young woman in high school whose mom was reading books for her. What if there's been insufficient transition planning and there are holes everywhere? So you're not, you have fear, but that fear is founded, right? Has the youth been taught to be a strong self-advocate from, you know, a very young age? You know, do you want an apple or an orange? Do you want to wear, oh, that's a great outfit, honey, pink polka dot shirt and purple and green striped pants. You look great. You know, have those self-advocacy skills, have that choice, decision-making, has it been promoted from an early age? You know, it's much harder to cultivate that ability mindset when the youth doesn't know what their disability is, when they don't know when they need help, and when they don't know how to ask for it. So how can educators help? You know, again, help the parents to focus on the abilities, accentuate the positive, so we can promote independence for learners, whatever that might look like across the spectrum of disabilities, and involve those learners in the decision-making and help parents understand that the learner should be involved in the decision-making, because so much of our energy and effort as parents is spent on getting through school. Then there comes this aha light bulb moment of, oh, school is just a small part of my kid's life. Now they have to live. And when parents see that, you can almost see, like, you know, deer in the headlights becomes, oh, okay, now life really starts, right? So in involving the learners in decisions, involving the parents and letting them know about the other agencies that can help, and something to definitely consider, which Debbie is going to talk about now, is letting the youth learn from their own mistakes.
Which is so important, because parents and educators and teachers, so many of us don't know how to let their child fail. When my oldest son was in elementary school and he was learning to write, he had to dictate, because at the time He was using a big, they don't make it anymore, big IntelliTalk keyboard and a IntelliTools keyboard. And it took him too long to find the letters physically. So he would dictate to his paraeducator what he wanted to write down. And we made it very clear to the paraeducator that if he spelled a word wrong, he had to spell things word by word. Just like the other kids were learning to spell, he was learning to spell. And if he spelled it wrong, they had to write it as he spelled it. And the paraeducator said this was the hardest thing. This was the hardest thing for them because, of course, they wanted him to be successful. But if he's making mistakes, he needs to learn, right? Learning is messy. And if the key to learning is from making mistakes and then reflecting on those mistakes, not just making the mistake and saying, oh, well, you made a mistake. What happened? Why did this happen? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again? What are some things we can do differently? So how can you help? Be sure the learner is aware of appropriate services and supports and is fully trained on how to access them, right? And then if that learner chooses to not use them, let them fail. What? This is what I had to do with my youngest son. When he was a junior in high school, it was a horrible year for him because he knew about how to use Google Calendars. He knew how to use all those tools. He was choosing to not use them. And so I decided as a parent, I needed to bite my tongue until it bled sometimes and not take over because we shared a Google Calendar with him. We knew what was on his Google Calendar. We knew it was on his school calendar. And we knew when his tests were, we knew it was due when. And if he chose to not prepare for things in advance, we had to let him face that consequence. And that consequence was sometimes he did not sleep at night because he would be up all night trying to read a chapter and write a paper because he didn't plan ahead for that. Even though he knew how to, he chose not to. So he had to learn. He had to learn, and then we would reflect what happened. And we'd talk about it. Oh, did that work for you? What worked? What didn't work? Did you like staying up all night? Did you get a good grade on that paper? Do you think if you had had more time on it, you would have done better? How can we plan better for that next time? What tools can you access to help you do better? And then keep in mind that the learners need to know they need to be assuming more responsibilities because like my son said, I'm not going to college with you. I'm not going to go live with you. I'm not going to, they need to learn to make mistakes and they need to learn how to reflect on what happened so they can learn from those mistakes. So this is a process of you teaching them how to learn from those mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes. I think we need to keep that as the overarching theme here. There's nothing wrong with making a mistake. And I love Richard Branson's quote, do not be embarrassed by your failures. Learn from them and start again. So that's huge, right? And truly, self-advocacy is the key, as we've been saying all throughout here, to effective communication, acceptance, and inclusion. So self-advocacy strategies include being self-aware, knowing what your needs are, knowing what your desires are, knowing what your rights are. So can help people understand how to communicate with you, right? And promoting voice and choice, knowing that they have a voice, that it matters, and that they get to make choices. That's huge. That's another self-advocacy strategy, right? And knowing the laws. Do they understand what ADA does for them? Do they understand why that's so important as an adult with a disability? Why ADA is so important? Do they understand Department of Rehabilitation, what that can do for them? And how can they access that? Do they understand the disability students services at maybe their local college and how to access that? And what the laws are regarding that, knowing your rights and responsibilities. And of course, being creative and assertive is huge and is difficult, right? Sorry about that. And start early. We can't say this enough. And in fact, the one I was just at, they were emphasizing preschool. Start early with choice and voice and knowing that they have a voice and plan for their future. So what's a great tool you can use? A one-page profile. This is huge. I love a good one-page profile. I love a bad one-page profile. I
Who
love
doesn't love a
one-page
good one-page profile?
because one-page profiles, and we gave you some links to some different templates for them, but one-page profiles are a great tool that any child, any youth, any adult of any ability can use. Because what it basically says is, this is what people appreciate about me. This is what is important to me. And this is how you can support me in this situation, in this setting. So you as an adult can have 3 or 4 different one-page profiles, one for employment, one for where you live, and one for the medical world, right? And because how to support them in those different settings would be different, or could be different. So each one-page profile, I'm not going to show this video, but this is a video I really want you to go watch from Georgie. She is a young woman who had some brain injury and has autism, and she has had a one-page profile for her all through her schooling. And she, as an adult now, still values the one-page profile and can talk about the value of that one-page profile to her. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to show it, but I really do want you to go watch it. It's a fantastic video. So each one-page profile description has a minimum of 3 sections. And I always put this one first, is what others like, appreciate, and admire about me. That can go first. And it could be, for a very young person, it could be their laugh, their smile, their willingness to try, that they are resilient, that they will give it their best effort. For somebody older, they may say, hey, you know, people really like that I really know all this information about dinosaurs. It really depends on the individual about what others like, appreciate, and admire, because that abilities needs to always be first. And then what is important to me? This is good for us to know too, right? What is important to that individual? Hey, it's really important to me to know what my day is going to look like. It's really important to me that I know if there's any changes in my day early so I can prepare myself for them. And so how you can support me would be maybe create a visual schedule, or make sure I have access to a calendar, or, you know, whatever, right? So each has a minimum of those 3 sections. And as an adult, I've created one for myself because I think all adults should have one. And this is my one-page profile. But think about this, as an educator, how important and valuable this would be if you had every student in your class come to you with this day one, that their parents helped the individual create at their level, right? And any individual should, because then you would already know what their abilities are, what people like about them, and you would know what is important to them, and you'd know how to support them. Because it's hard to remember all those IEPs, right? You know, 28-page IEP, you know, you've got, 70 people on your caseload with 28-page IEPs. It's hard to read them all. You will read them all, but day one, wouldn't it be great to have this for all your kids? And you could just have that on a folder on your desk, and you could look at that and you would know how to support them from day one before you dig into all the IEP things and how to integrate that into their learning. It's fabulous. And if for employment, I use this, I did a one-page profile for my oldest son when he went into independent living. I had it on his fridge because what was really important to him, he's got severe food allergies. So we need to make sure the staff didn't make food with those allergies in them, with those items in them, so he could live. Very important, very, very, very valuable. So how can you help promote those learner-led IEPs and teach those self-determination and self-advocacy skills early, and often start in elementary school? And you can even start this in preschool with one-page profiles, right? And in fact, there is at San Jose State University, one of the teachers there who teaches preschool educators has now incorporated using one-page profiles with her educators that she is teaching. I love that. Perfect for all kids. Make sure the young adult has a way of communicating their desires, wants, and needs. If it's too hard for the young adult to say it verbally, the one-page profile is a tool they can use to give to somebody so they know, right? Give learners the opportunity to make their own choices. We've said that before. Create a culture of belonging for that learner, because they do belong, right? And educate the families as to the importance of that culture of belonging, and explicitly teach learners their rights. Make sure they know. Which goes to
Yeah, I mean, isn't this what we want for ourselves and any of our children? Just to be listened to be heard, to be respected, and to and parents want to know that their youth are going to be included,
Yes.
feel valued, and contribute to society. And we know that the role of parents is going to change from in the child's life. First, you nurture and protect, then you give lots of chances to learn, then there's full involvement in family activities, and then you venture out with community organizations, you give chores and responsibilities to develop into those independent living skills, first jobs, provide soft skills, the whole gamut, right? But a family that is involved, parents that are involved, I mean, if you saw Jonathan Mooney this morning, he was singing the praises of his mom. They could be the keys. That is
Exactly.
the key to the success. And
Right.
we all just want to think big, have those
Exactly.
high expectations. Again, Jonathan Mooney was talking about how most people, when he was growing up, had low expectations that he
Right.
encountered in school, and how damaging and traumatic that
That
was.
was terrible.
So
Terrible.
have high expectations. Every team that involves anyone with that youth, with that adult, have the high expectations. Ask those questions. What do you want out of your life? And let's make that happen. I think we're on the next slide, Debbie.
Oh, sorry. Think
Having
big!
yeah, there we go. Think big and have those high expectations. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but inclusion is essential because you cannot teach someone to live in a typical heterogeneous world. They
Yep.
have to learn how to live
In a
heterogeneous world by being
Exactly.
inclusive.
Yeah, I think the best quote I ever have on that one is, remember, parents are raising adults, not children. Even a 3-year-old, you're going to be raising that person to adulthood. And educators, you're raising adults. Keep that in mind. We're raising adults. We need to keep that vision in our heads. So we have a ton of resources for you to dig through. All of these are links. You should have the PDF available to you as well, of all of this and all of these links, more than you could ever possibly want.
That's what we do. We
That's
give
exactly.
lots
We
of
give
links.
all the links. So is there, we have a few minutes. Were there any questions that came up in the chat, Alyssa, or Q&A or anything we need to, we have a moment for?
There is a question in the Q&A about the completion date with does the alternative pathway
Right.
change a completion date? So maybe since you just sat in on that partially
Right.
this morning.
I totally recommend you go back and actually watch, or at least just download the information from the alternative pathway to diploma, because that explains all of the answers. But there is, for the alternative pathway to a diploma, there is no completion date. And even if somebody receives that diploma, and this is new to California, they can continue to stay in school to receive other services they may need to be an independent adult meeting their goals. So just know there is no end date to that except for 22, just like anyone at their age. But I really recommend you go and get it from them because they were fantastic and I was absorbing everything. Any other questions that have come up?
Nope, that was it.
Oh,
Well,
fabulous.
Thank you, Debbie and Alyssa, and thank you to everyone in attendance for your commitment to students with disabilities and their families. It's our mission to accelerate our educational system, to innovate, include, and impact outcomes positively for all, from birth to childhood and beyond. This presentation slides and the resources can be accessed in the session description section on the VFAIR's agenda page. And that's the same with any of the sessions that you've seen today, like about alt pathways. The link is just on their agenda, and I've dropped it in the chat for anyone that would like to access it.
Perfect.
If you have any additional questions, please head to the information booth. You may find your answer there. Be sure to join us. First, we've got a lunch break, so you can relax and refresh with DJ Diamond, DJ B Diamond. After that, we have our keynote speaker, Nicole Tucker-Smith. Please do come join us. Also connect with other attendees in the social lounge and stop to take a selfie in the photo booth. Don't forget to share your share on the socials and tag at SIP Inclusion with the hashtag SIPCon 2024. Thank you everyone for being here. Bye for now.
Thank you.